If you're a fan of essay writing and social critique with sharp, precise language and a lot of nuance, then you're going to want to hear what I have to say about Randall Kennedy's new book, Say It Loud. Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz. Okay, I have here the pretty new collection of essays and writings from Randall Kennedy, who is a Harvard Law scholar. The book is called Say It Loud, and the subtitle is On Race, Law, History, and Culture. And it is, I'm going to go right into my main idea before I talk about the research, readability, and reasonableness of it. But it's a collection of essays and articles and some previous writings that have been compiled together and some new writings. So in that regard, it's a little hard to say there's one main idea, but basically it's a collection of Randall Kennedy's writings that cover a lot of various kind of social events and social issues, as well as some historical issues. So there's some chapters that survey historical figures, and there's some chapters that talk about very recent events like George Floyd, and there's some chapters that review books that are recent, like Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. And then there's also more thematic chapters that just discuss a kind of particular social issue, like the language that Black people in America have used to name themselves and kind of the changes around that. So as you can say, it's a wide-ranging kind of collection of ideas, but they all kind of loosely fit under the category of race and social issues in America. So that's the kind of the main idea. Now, the research behind it. So Randall Kennedy is a Harvard Law scholar, so he brings some serious research abilities to this. And a lot of his things that are footnoted and a lot of his research come from the history of courts. So the history of legal decisions, not only from the Supreme Court, but as you'd probably expect, a lot of the Supreme Court shows up. And so he surveys a lot of those legal decisions and so forth. There is some just straight up history as well, historical research that he points to his sources there, particularly when he talks about historical figures like Frederick Douglass or Nat Turner. But it primarily, because of his expertise, it primarily resides in the category of law. So just know that going into it, but it's very good. I found his research really easy to follow and very dependable. So now the readability of it. This is a long book. It's pretty long, maybe too long. I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. But that being said, the page-for-page style is not hard to read. He is an academic, but he's a really clear writer, a clear, good writer. And so I'm so grateful when I can find academics like that. This is my first book I've read by him. I'm so grateful when I can find academics who can write with clarity. There's no pretense in the writing and the style at all. It's not hard to understand what he's getting at. And some of the chapters are super breezy, super short actually. So it's very readable page for page, but it is very long. It's also very wide ranging. So I mean the topics, you could jump from one topic to another from chapter to chapter and be going in very different directions. That doesn't hamper the readability of it too much, but it did take me a little bit longer to get through this book than a lot of other comparable books because of I think the varied nature of the topics and categories that are discussed. But like I said, page for page, sentence for sentence, easy to read, very approachable, actually just very enjoyable to read. And then finally, the reasonableness. So I really loved this book. I'm just going to say that up front here. I love this book overall. But I do think it's marred a little bit by the length overall, but more specifically, I just think some of the essays could have just been cut out of the book. There's a few that almost feel like they're detours. There's a few book reviews that feel like maybe they didn't quite belong in this book, that they were a little bit too specific. You can tell they were maybe published in like a periodical, and they just kind of got pulled and put into this collection. So there's a few too many essays. I have probably maybe, there's 29 essays, there's maybe like 3 to 5 I really wish would have been cut. And overall the collection could have been trimmed down and maybe tightened a little bit more thematically that way. So that's a bummer to me that was present in the book because I loved a lot of this book. And I wrote down some of the essays in particular that struck me. He has an outstanding essay on Derek Bell, the critical race theory forefather, so to speak. There's an excellent essay on a very nuanced critique and appreciation of Derek Bell's legacy. There's a fantastic historical essay on kind of revising the legacy of Nat Turner and Nat Turner's rebellion. There's a really outstanding essay called Black Power Hagiography, in which he assesses the kind of legacy of Black Power figures like Huey Newton and Malcolm X. I really, really appreciated his take in that chapter. There's a couple chapters that dive into the questions of language and naming around how Black people in America have used and adopted different names for themselves as a group. That was really fascinating. Again, very nuanced. And on that note, one theme that kind of goes through the book is he really dives into the question of whether or not people should continue to use racial identifiers, particularly Black people in America, like whether or not they should continue to do that or whether they should seek to stop doing that. And his take on that is so thoughtful and balanced and nuanced that I'm going to use the word nuance over and over again, because that's one of the things he really brings to this. He's a deeply progressive person, but he does not fit squarely into the progressive woke left kind of thing that you might assume. In fact, he has a couple essays that really critique some of the extremes of the anti-racist, he calls it anti-racism gone awry. He really critiques some of that stuff. So he's not easy to pin down, at least in our boxes that we use culturally right now, and that's part of why I appreciated it so much, but very thoughtful, very scholarly, very academic, and he highlights some people I had never heard of, like Charles Hamilton Houston and Isaac Woodard and Judge Waring, and some historical figures that figure prominently in kind of the shifts that happen around civil rights and leading up to civil rights that I'm really grateful and I know about now because I read this book. So those are some of my thoughts, taking my final thoughts as I kind of put this book down and marinate on it a little bit. Hopefully that gives you a sense of whether or not this is a book you would like. It is, like I said, long. It's a little dense at times. It's a little heavier reading in the sense of the number of things that are discussed in it. But if you're someone who wants a thoughtful voice that wades right into a lot of these cultural issues as it relates to race and American history, and particular historical figures, then man, Say It Loud is a really excellent book. Excellent collection of essays. Even if I wish it had been trimmed down a little bit, I'm still super grateful that I read it, and has sparked a lot of my own thought and reflection. So would highly recommend Say It Loud by Randall Kennedy if you're interested in that kind of writing. Thanks for watching. I hope that you appreciated this review.